What's up, guys? This is Chris from DraftDashboard.com.
Here are my DFS picks for MLB Friday, August 13th.
These picks apply for DraftKings and FanDuel. Before I get started, please drop a like on this video and hit that red subscribe button
And hit that bell icon.
so you don't miss our new videos.
In this video, I'm going to go over my top DFS picks for today's MLB slate.
And if you stick around to the very end of this video, we'll use the Draft Dashboard tools to make a DFS lineup using the picks we just made.
Okay guys, we have a 14-game slate tonight, and oh boy did Jose Berrios do us dirty last night. What a disappointment. But you know, that's going to happen in the MLB. You're looking for consistency over time. Going to have those good days and bad days. So let's get into this 14-game slate. At the pitcher position, I like Blake Snell, pitching against a low-salary batting team, the Arizona Diamondbacks. Blake Snell, he's giving up a .579 OPS versus lefties and a .667 OPS versus switch hitters. He's facing 3 lefties and 2 switch hitters. But the reason that I like this pick is because the Diamondbacks have only hit 6 of his last 35 pitches. That's a 171 batting average. He's $9,000 FanDuel salary and $6,000 less on DraftKings. Projected at 35.7 fantasy points here tonight. He has an ERA of 4.86. His record is 6-4 on the season, pitching an average of 86 pitches per game. Now, he's only averaging 27 fantasy points per game, but this guy's got some major upside when he gets going. He scored 70, 36, and -6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So you can see he has a monster ceiling. So I like Blake Snell here versus the Arizona Diamondbacks. Okay, let's take a look at the catcher first base position. I'm going to give you a stud pick here. I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. with a 19% batting advantage over Chris Flexen. Vladimir Guerrero Jr., he bats 6% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .913 OPS versus righties. And Chris Flexen, he pitches 13% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .830 OPS versus righties. So he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, and Vladimir Guerrero Jr. is 2 for 2 with a 2.5 OPS versus Flexen. He's 4,600 FanDuel salary, 1,600 more on DraftKings, projected at 13.6 fantasy points here tonight. He's averaging 14 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been in a little slump lately, only scoring 6, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think he's due for a big game here tonight. So I like Vladimir Guerrero Jr. here versus Chris Flexen. Now I also like Freddie Freeman with a 24% batting advantage over Josiah Gray. Freddie Freeman is batting 34% better versus righty pitchers, batting a 1.091 OPS versus righties. And Josiah Gray, he pitches a .800 OPS versus lefties. Freddie Freeman is 0 for 1 versus Gray, and he's 3,600 FanDuel salary and 1,200 more on DraftKings. Projected at 12.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season, and he's been in a little slump, only scoring 0, 9, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think he gets back on track here tonight. So I like Freddie Freeman here versus Josiah Gray. Okay, now here's a value play for you. Take a look at Kevin Plawecki with a 35% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Kevin Plawecki, he's batting a .761 OPS versus righties, and Spencer Watkins, he pitches 48% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .837 OPS versus righties. Now there's no at-bats versus Watkins yet, but I like this pick because Kevin Plawecki is only $2,200 FanDuel salary. He's $1,100 more on DraftKings, so I love that FanDuel price. He's projected at 8.8 fantasy points here tonight. Now he's only averaging 5 fantasy points per game on the season, but he scored 3, 10, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I also like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under, so a lot of fantasy points to go around. So I like Kevin Plawecki here versus Spencer Watkins. Okay, let's take a look at the second base position. I had a hard time with this position, but I found a couple of guys to save a little salary here. I like Tommy Edman with a 71% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Mike Minor. Tommy Edman, he's batting 27% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a .858 OPS versus lefties. And Mike Minor, he throws his worst ball by far to switch hitters, 45% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.267 OPS versus switch hitters. Now, Tommy Edman is 0 for 3 versus Minor, but the splits are fantastic, and he's only $2,900 FanDuel salary, and he's only $200 more on DraftKings. Projected at 8.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 9, 3, and 22 fantasy points in his last 3 games. So I like Tommy Edman here versus Mike Minor.
Real quick, guys, I got great news. For a limited time, we're offering a full 30-day trial to Draft Dashboard. You can try all of our DFS tools for all sports. You can try the Position Optimizer, where you can see the top players ranked for each position. And we added a new Player Trends tool, where you can see the top salary differences between FanDuel and DraftKings. It's a really good tool to help you pick out value for the site that you're playing on. Oh, and if you're tired of doing research every day, we just added a cheat sheet that shows hand-picked plays for the slate. No confusing stat lines, no headaches, just a simple cheat sheet that shows the absolute best players for your lineups.
Now I also like Mike Moustakas with a 43% batting advantage over Zach Wheeler. Mike Moustakas, he bats 39% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .871 OPS versus righties. And Zach Wheeler, he pitches his worst ball versus lefty batters, giving up a .634 OPS versus lefties. Mike Moustakas is 2 for 5, batting .400 batting average, and a 1.7 OPS versus Wheeler. Now he's only $2,800 on FanDuel, so I love that FanDuel price. He's projected at 10.2 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 3, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games, so I think he's due for a hit here. So I like Mike Moustakas here versus Zach Wheeler. Okay, let's take a look at the third base position. Here's another stud pick. I like Jose Ramirez with a 40% batting advantage over a low salary pitcher, Tyler Alexander. Jose Ramirez is batting 21% better versus lefty pitchers, batting a 1.103 OPS versus lefties. And Tyler Alexander, he pitches 19% worse to switch hitters as he does his other pitches, giving up a .891 OPS versus switch hitters. Jose Ramirez is 3 for 8. That's a .375 batting average with a 1.125 OPS versus Alexander. He's $4,200 FanDuel salary and $1,500 more on DraftKings. Projected at 12.6 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. And yet again, another stud that's been in a slump, only scoring 0, 3, and 3 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I think he's due for a big game. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Jose Ramirez here versus Tyler Alexander. Okay, now here's a value play for you. I like Joey Wendell with a 37% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Michael Pineda. Joey Wendell bats 26% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .820 OPS versus righties. And Michael Pineda, he pitches 11% worse to lefties as he does righties, giving up a .636 OPS versus lefties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Pineda yet, but I like this pick because Joey Wendell is only $2,600 FanDuel salary. He's $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 9.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 9 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 12 and 10 fantasy points in his last 2 games. So I like Joey Wendell here versus Michael Pineda. Okay, who do we have at the shortstop position? I like Xander Bogaerts with a 37% batting advantage over a low-salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. Xander Bogaerts is batting a .842 OPS versus righties, and Spencer Watkins pitches 48% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .837 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Watkins yet, and Xander Bogaerts is $3,600 FanDuel salary, $1,800 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.1 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 48, and 9 fantasy points in the last 3 games. Then I like this pick because Vegas thinks this is going to be a high-scoring game. 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under, so this is a good game to stack. So I like Xander Bogaerts here versus Spencer Watkins. Now I also like Corey Seager with a 59% batting advantage over Taylor Megill. Corey Seager bats 11% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .891 OPS versus righties. And Taylor Megill, he pitches his worst ball by far to lefty batters, 48% worse than his other pitches, giving up a .956 OPS versus lefties. So there's no at-bats versus Megill yet, but the splits are great, and Corey Seager is $3,000 FanDuel salary, $1,300 more on DraftKings, projected at 11.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 11 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 3, 12, and 31 fantasy points in the last 3 games. So I like Corey Seager here versus Taylor Megill. Okay, moving on to the outfield position. Here's another stud pick for you. I like J.D. Martinez with a 55% batting advantage over the low-salary pitcher, Spencer Watkins. J.D. Martinez bats 7% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .802 OPS versus righties. And we know Spencer Watkins throws 48% worse to righties as he does lefties, giving up a .837 OPS versus righties. Now, there's no at-bats versus Watkins yet, but the splits are good, and J.D. Martinez is $4,000 FanDuel salary. He's $1,100 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.3 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 38, and 0 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like J.D. Martinez here versus Spencer Watkins. Now I also like Cedric Mullins with a 43% batting advantage over Nick Pivetta. Cedric Mullins is batting 19% better versus righty pitchers, batting a .874 OPS versus righties. And Nick Pivetta, he throws his worst ball versus switch hitters, 25% worse than his other pitches, giving up a 1.057 OPS versus switch hitters. Cedric Mullins is 3 for 8, batting a .375 batting average, and a 1.194 OPS versus Pivetta. And I like this pick because his salary is pretty reasonable here. Only $3,500 FanDuel salary and $800 more on DraftKings. Projected at 9.7 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 18, 6, and 12 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And I think this guy's worth adding to your stack here because we know Vegas thinks there's going to be 11 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Cedric Mullins here versus Nick Pivetta. I also like Franmil Reyes with a 29% batting advantage over that low-salary pitcher, Tyler Alexander. Franmil Reyes is batting a .749 OPS versus lefty pitchers, and Tyler Alexander, he pitches his worst ball versus righty batters, 43% worse than his pitch to lefties, giving up a .923 OPS versus righties. Franmil Reyes is 3 for 4, that's a .750 batting average, and a 2.3 OPS versus Alexander. He's $3,400 FanDuel salary, $1,900 more on DraftKings, projected at 10.4 fantasy points here tonight, averaging 12 fantasy points per game on the season. He scored 0, 6, and 6 fantasy points in the last 3 games. And Vegas thinks there's going to be 9.5 runs scored in this game. That's their over-under. So I like Franmil Reyes here versus Tyler Alexander.
If you want to try all these daily fantasy tools for yourself, click the link in the description below this video or just go to draftdashboard.com. You can use our DFS lineup optimizer to build quality lineups using our picks and your own custom player pool. Click the link in the description below this video and try all these daily fantasy tools right now. Thanks so much for watching. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe to this channel and hit that bell icon so you can get instant updates whenever we post a new video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, please smash that like button and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Oh, and please comment below with your favorite player for this NBA slate. I love to hear what you guys have to think. Thanks again, and good luck.